Welcome to Japan Society online event, Soundscapes of Contemporary Japan with Eric Hart and Nick Luscombe. My name is Kyoko Tachibana. I'm part of the events team at Japan Society. Before we start, just a bit of housekeeping. Your mics have been muted on arrival, and please keep them switched off so that we can eliminate background noise. During today's event, we will be listening to some sound clips, so we recommend you to use a pair of earphones or headphones. We do encourage you to have your cameras turned on if you're comfortable. There'll be time for Q&A, so do pop your thoughts and questions in the chat, and we'll try and pick up as many as possible.
9 participants.
We want to make this an interactive session, so if you prefer to ask a question camera later on, you can use a raise hand button, which is, I think for most people, it's in the reaction button at the bottom. Welcome again, everyone. Today's event will focus on the soundscapes of contemporary Japan, and we are pleased to welcome Eric Hart and Nick Luscombe. Eric Hart is a British producer, artist and sound recordist currently based in Provence in southern France. His work explores the realms of field recording, soundscape composition and sound design through a practice deeply rooted in listening to and connecting with the natural world. In 2019, he traveled to Japan to begin working on a field project supported by the British Library Sound Archive. This project explores the relationship that exists between sound and spirituality in Japanese culture, documenting present-day practices, rituals, performances, and interactions with Japanese artists, festivals, folk culture, and sacred places. Nick Luscombe is a London and Tokyo-based DJ and broadcaster. He's joining from Tokyo today, and he has been described as restless musical soul. And his passion for sound and music spans all times, spaces, and places, reflected in his much-loved Late Junction programs on BBC Radio 3 and the long-running Floor Motion New Ratio radio shows, which he has expertly selected over 20 years. He also currently presents weekly live radio shows at CIC Tokyo. Nick is the founder and creative director of Musicity, the leading agency for music and architecture, with a series of commissioned work and events across Asia and Europe. He's also the co-founder of Japan Sound Portrait, a podcast and promotion agency. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Nick and he can introduce himself and share what he's been doing.
All right, thanks a lot. That's a great introduction, thank you. Yeah, hello everyone, thanks a lot for joining, taking time out of the weekend to join us. Just a very brief bit of background. So I've been, I guess, recording sounds in Japan for over 20 years. Probably the first time I came to this place was in the late 90s, and I bought a mini disc player. It's one of the first things I bought, and a little mic, and I just basically spent 2 weeks just you know, as well as eating everything I could find, recording the sounds of everything that I could hear. And I was just blown away by just the kind of soundscapes generally of Japan and Tokyo and all the places I visited. And that's the thing that really got me into kind of, I don't know, almost full-time sound discovery, I suppose, through that kind of process. And I realized that I wasn't really looking at photographs that I was taking anymore. I was just listening to the experiences of places. And you know, fast forward to 2021, and I'm still doing it every day. I'm just constantly recording sounds. It's not a day that goes by where I don't record something in this place. And yeah, I find it fascinating. So it's going to be really interesting to talk to learn more about Matt, about your work for sure, and also just to kind of explore this whole area. So yeah, over to you, Matt.
Well, yeah, thanks for the lovely introduction, Coco, and thanks for organizing this event. It's really nice to speak to you all. So to introduce myself, yeah, my name's Matt. I traveled to Japan for the first time back in 2016, and I was just so touched by my experience that I tried everything to go back. And when I started, I was working at the British Library Sound Archive. I was working on a project which was creating a soundscape for an exhibition on Buddhism that they had in 2019, which some of you might have visited if you're in London. It was a wonderful exhibition. Part of the task that I had was to kind of comb through the sound archive and pull out recordings from that were Buddhist related and came from different areas of the world, so India and China and Tibet and Nepal. And I noticed that there were very few recordings that came from Japan, and I knew that Japan was such a rich, had such a rich culture of not only Buddhism, but in its own spiritual and religious areas, and in the north and in the south. So I proposed a project to go myself with my sound recording equipment, and that was approved and supported really really fondly by the Sound Archive. So I visited in 2019. I was there for just about 3 months, and well, like Nick said, I came with a recorder and I just recorded pretty much everything I could, but with a focus really on the sound and how sounds interact between nature and the spiritual side of Japanese culture. So I was lucky enough to visit a lot of temples, not only Buddhist temples, Shinto shrines, and as we might discover further in the talk, I spent some time with some very amazing people called the Yamabushi in the Yamagata region of Japan, which is in the north west. Yeah, so I won't take up too much time. I'll hand back over to Nick because I think he's going to play us some sounds from his project. Am I right?
Yeah, can do. As you can probably tell, this is going to be quite free form. We don't have a script. We want to keep it conversational, and that's partly because I think I want to ask you lots of questions, and I think we just want to have a bit of a ping pong kind of thing. So yeah, I could start off with a recording of something that I put together for a new compilation, which is going to come out in September, which Matt, you've got a track on as well. So I don't know if we're going to hear what you put on.
I hadn't actually included, but
don't worry.
We can keep it as a teaser, but I can talk about it. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah.
Shall I play the sound?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah. Thanks. So this is basically a composition, I guess. Sounds a bit much actually to say composition. I still feel it's quite awkward for me to kind of think about it in those terms, but it's more like a collage, I guess, of different sounds that that I recorded in Tokyo over the last few months. So they're kind of quite spring sounds. There's a theme that runs through it, which is one of the kind of automated barrier emergency sounds. So when the train goes by, and you've got these barriers that come down through to kind of radio broadcasts and traffic sounds and people playing baseball in the park. And the idea really was to just try and, in a kind of 4-minute piece, to capture all these really sort of day-to-day sounds that could really easily pass you by, if you didn't kind of stop and properly listen. And what I like about this kind of approach is that it is quite personal, and you're just trying to kind of freeze in time all these different moments of sound and activity. And it's probably very different, maybe, to the way that Matt, that you do this. And I guess, for me, it's all about just finding things and just kind of trying to put as much together as possible, to try and squeeze in every kind of moment within a few minutes. And I think there are so many different approaches to it. But I'm curious about, your approach and how you kind of go about capturing what you consider to be like one of the important sounds of Japan.
Yes, I mean, it's such a, I mean, I remember when I visited first time in 2016, and that wasn't as part of the project. And I remember just the sound world as you step into, well, I flew to Tokyo, when you step into the airport and you have the sounds of a big public place, and then you take the train and you're in the city, and it can be, it's so much information. I think it takes 2 or 3 days for you to kind of settle into a point where you can really start to hear. I mean, this is something that I really experienced because I was there in late summer and autumn, and you have the sound of the cigales is the French word, semi in Japanese, which are the I'm mixing 3 languages together. In English, it's
cicada.
Cicada, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
And the intent, I was just so impressed by the intensity of the sound, and it was everywhere. So every time I was getting my sound recording equipment out, I was finding that I couldn't record what I wanted to record because I had to shelter from this incredible cacophony of these insects. But yeah, I think for my project, a lot of it was, I was organizing location recordings. So I was contacting artists, musicians, temples, monks, translators, and trying to get these kind of sessions where I would bring my microphones and we would, for example, record ceremonies and rituals. So there was an element of kind of planning it. But often I would do, if I could, I would travel to the location before and kind of bring a portable recorder and just kind of take an atmosphere recording, so I knew what to expect and find the best position. And I think, there's so much, you can really plan everything down to the T where you're going to put the microphones and so on. But there are things like traffic and aeroplanes and, even the wind has a huge impact on sound recording. So it depends on the weather. But yeah, I think to answer the question, it's more of a mix. I mean, I love those kind of bringing your microphones and really tuning your kit to try and get the best sound in the space. But sometimes there are just moments that you have to be there. You have to have the recorder on for you to capture. I'm drawn to one recording I made on the beach in Kamakura. I was just walking along late at night, and there was a man playing a sanshin, which is like a Okinawa instrument, like a 3-stringed kind of shamisen based instrument. And he was just sitting on the waves, just with his feet in the water, playing this melody. And I could never have planned it. I couldn't. I didn't want to interrupt him either because he was in his own moment. So I kind of very, very subtly approached from where I could get a good recording, and then afterwards I made sure that he was okay for me to use the recording. I spoke some pretty bad Japanese to ask, but he seemed okay with it. But yeah, I think it totally depends on the moment. But as I always think with field recording, it's better to have a recording than nothing, even if it just means taking your phone out and recording using that. At least you have a document of the place.
Totally, yeah. I mean, I use my phone a lot, you know, because I think these days the phones that most of us have are very good, right, for this kind of thing. So it becomes a really democratic kind of, well, as long as you've got a phone, you know, quite a democratic kind of art form in a way, doesn't it? It's quite a simple thing to do generally. You know, this isn't just Japan. This is just field recording as a thing. Quality is pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm drawn to, when we were talking last time, you mentioned that you drew parallels between field recording and the kind of punk culture of, you know, it doesn't have to be tidy and necessarily well presented. It can just be a pure kind of reflection of the space or the kind of intention of whatever you're trying to record. And often, I mean, especially when you're recording in crowded places, for example, like Tokyo, it's almost impossible to, you know, I mean, I think I tried once in Tokyo to set up my microphones inside a station and try and get good positioning. And you can't ask every single person that comes by to not, you know, come near the microphone. It's just not possible. So sometimes, you know, there's that kind of stealth element as well. You know, you kind of just want something that doesn't scream that you're making a recording. And I find in mobile, I mean, especially the recent model phones, all the big producers, they have pretty good microphones, I find.
Yeah, definitely. I was also going to ask you, sorry, jump in if you want to ask me anything, by the way, but I've just kind of just got so many things I want to do. But I was going to also ask you about the differences between, you know, the sounds that you've kind of managed to get here in Japan and elsewhere, and how they compare. I mean, is there any way that, because I got this thing where I kind of think that Japan is probably, or even just Tokyo is sonically possibly the richest place I've ever been to, because you got that kind of incredible mix of the kind of, like you said, the cicada right now, you know, in summer, it's just, that's all you can hear. But then you've got like all these kind of robot voices everywhere telling you what way to go and to do this and not to do this. So it feels like, you know, when I've been to, you know, the last time I was in London, it just felt really quiet, you know, in comparison. Do you agree with that? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from London. I lived there, you know, most of my life. And now I live in France. I live in the south of France, which is, again, lovely. We also have cicadas everywhere at this time of year, so that hasn't changed. But I find I'm kind of drawn to, I love recording in nature. I love recording where the human element in sound is minimal, because I think, you know, it's quite difficult to find places like that. I mean, I remember living in London, I would often go to, I used to live in Swiss Cottage, so I used to go to Belsize, Primrose Hill, to make recordings in the park. And often you realize that when you listen back to your recordings, what you think is a kind of soundscape of a green space is just the sound of sirens and traffic and airplanes and kind of, you know, dogs. And I mean, that in itself is a soundscape. It is a place, and it has a certain signature. You know, if you compare those places, that park with Hyde Park or another park or Regent Park, there will be different kind of sonic signatures. And I find that fascinating. And one of the big shocks I had going to Japan when I was in Tokyo, I was, for my project, I was in Tokyo for about a week before I moved on to Kamakura, which is not far from Tokyo, but much more kind of nature by the sea. And in Tokyo, I would try to find these places where I could record. And one of the places that I really like is a cemetery in Yanaka Cemetery, which is towards, it's quite far out of the town. It's towards, I think it's the north. My names have left my head, but it was a sound. And one of the sounds that I found so beautiful was in Japanese cemeteries, you have the wooden sticks that are engraved with messages in the names. And if there's a wind blowing, you have this incredible, delicate sound of these wooden posts kind of clacking together. And in a big cemetery, it creates this really interesting soundscape. But going there in summer, it was just the sound of the semi and the sound of the trains, and I couldn't find a way to represent that sound because it was lost in the kind of the larger soundscape. So I think it's a battle sometimes to really. It's a battle between kind of going and impulsively recording a location, and sometimes it can take a lot of thought to get the sound that you want exactly. So I'm quite methodical in my approach. I like to use quite a few microphones, and I like to, if I can, always go to a location at least once to try and get a sense of place. And even if I'm just making a stereo recording using a stereo bar, I like to walk around, find places that I can really use my ears to get the best place. But that's kind of a little bit into my practice. I mean, what's your equipment that you use? Do you tend to use like an inbuilt mic, or do you go around with stereo mics? I know you use a bit of a mix as well, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, for years I've been using, I've kind of brought, this is always wouldn't be basic, but I kind of use one of these for most things. This is a Zoom H6 and it's got a built-in microphone, and you can change mono and stereo mics on there. That's pretty basic, but I find that this is so good for just everything I need it for pretty much. And that can be kind of, whether it's kind of improvised, music that you just kind of, people on the street busking or someone playing in a park, through to, location recordings of birds or whatever. So I kind of use this pretty much all the time. And then the only other thing I have is probably, other mics. Like there's a company called LOM, which make kind of really good quality, small, mics that you can kind of hang, or, geophones that you can drill into the sand. So, and then I've got this Sennheiser. We're getting quite geeky here, aren't we? But a Sennheiser 416, which is a kind of shotgun mic, which is good. But I find that this pretty much delivers every time, and this is pretty much what I use pretty much every day. I carry this around with me, and I use that, and I get good results from it. And I think it's more about what you're comfortable with, isn't it, and the sound you enjoy. Because other field recordists might listen and think this isn't really up to scratch, but for me, the sound from this is almost perfect. It kind of seems to just create the sound that I want to hear.
Well, I'd be interested to see if there's anyone in this conversation from who comes from a field recording background. I find it personally quite intimidating when you join into discussions, certainly Facebook groups and online forums. I think you can so easily get lost in the technical benefits and downsides of this mic and X, Y, and all of that. And I mean, I run some field recording workshops here in France, and one of the things that I really try to always encourage is that, you know, I've lost so many moments of actual content because I've been more worried about getting the right angle or getting the right technical recording. And I think back and I think, God, I just wish I'd pressed record, and afterwards, I mean, there's certainly in terms of post-production now, when we're editing and mixing, some of the tools are so powerful. I mean, I'm a huge fan of isotope software. There's an isotope RX, which is a very advanced kind of audio editing tool, and I use it depending on the project. But some of the recordings I made in Japan, inevitably there might be a bit of wind noise or microphone boom or somebody kind of hitting the mic at some points when I was recording in crowds. And the technology can really just remove those impurities. So it's incredible how much you can do after the recording as well, as long as you can make a controlled recording that hasn't distorted or peaked. And even now with 32-bit recording, floating point recording, that's almost becoming a thing of the past, I think, as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it?
But it's
yeah. Go on, sorry.
No, I was just saying I'm saying it's never been, I think, easier to get into it. I think a lot of people are expressing an interest in field recording, and we're seeing more and more field recording being used in kind of music, I think, as well, in popular music. I mean, I'm a huge fan of your radio shows, and I know you're a big supporter of artists that kind of explore field recording in their practice. I can't shoot off a few names on my head, but there's a recent album, Claire Rouse is an artist who's incredible use of field recordings.
You're right, there's a lot. And I don't know there was a kind of not a tipping point, what's the right expression I'm looking for, but there was a moment very recently where it just seemed to be suddenly every press release for any record I was getting mentioned field recording, whereas I thought it was kind of like quite a slightly hidden practice that that people were kind of involved in. I kind of thought I knew most of those people, and then suddenly you think, wow, it's kind of like a boom. And a lot of people attributed that to in the UK anyway, to the whole lockdown thing that was going on, and people taking a lot more time to actually listen to their own environment. So listening to domestic machinery for the first time ever, because they're at home much more often, and also just the sounds of the animals around them, the birds in the trees. And because there were very few planes taking off and landing, suddenly this whole soundscape opening up to people. And Chris Watson was talking about this. I think any of these discussions will always mention Chris Watson, but for good reason, I think. But he's a BBC sound recordist. He does a lot of the kind of amazing nature programs, and an expert in this area. But he was talking about how because suddenly there was a lack of traffic noise during the, I think, the first lockdown. I wasn't there at the time, but and lack of traffic noise generally in airplanes, that birds could suddenly hear each other over longer distances, which meant to compete they would be singing louder because they would feel more vulnerable and threatened, and they didn't know there were other birds that close because they couldn't hear them before. Because so then people started listening to these birds and realizing, I think that's happened everywhere. I think that's happening in Japan, where people really appreciate the sounds a lot more of the city in Tokyo, because traffic has been reduced. I mean, it's pretty busy again now, to be fair, but there was a period where people were kind of staying indoors quite a lot, and then the soundscape of Tokyo really changed. Like I had to have a meeting. I think I went to Ginza for a meeting, and what was really striking is there were no tourists at all, and there are no tourists really now. And Ginza would sound, the language you would hear would be mostly Chinese people speaking, and now you just hear kind of it's very quiet. Japanese is the only language you hear as you walk around. So the soundscape of Tokyo has changed, I think, enormously, over the last year and a half, which is interesting. So the first thing I did, I went back to Ginza with my mics and thought this might be a one-off chance to actually capture this sound of Ginza, like as a Japanese place, that has a Japanese sound to it, if you like. Do you know what I mean? In a funny sort of way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to say that it's not an international place, and that is also part of the makeup, but just this moment in time where it was suddenly, very different. So so for me, that was quite an interesting one.
Yeah, I think one of the things I find really incredible about your work is that you are able to extract rich soundscapes from urban environments, which is something I've always struggled with, because my preference is to kind of work in quiet environments and then kind of really amplify in a way the kind of the softer sounds, the delicate sounds, the hidden sounds of that environment. And I find that when you record in an urban soundscape, you kind of do the opposite. You kind of you focus on this great rich sound and how it becomes almost like a tapestry of that moment and that information. And in Japan, I mean, if I've made recordings walking through urban spaces. When I was in Sapporo in Hokkaido, I walked, it's kind of a long, almost kind of New York style grid. You can go all the way through and out the city in one road. And so I started, and I found in a half an hour, I had this incredible recording. But if you played that to a person who spoke and understood Japanese, they would be like, oh, that's a toothpaste commercial, or that's trying to sell you a burger, or but to us it just sounds like this incredible information that's just, and it's very melodic. There's often musical accompaniment to a lot of Japanese streets, and you have speakers almost everywhere. Everything makes a kind of noise, from the traffic lights to going into buildings to there's a robot almost, I imagine, in London they say that you're never more than I think it's 6 feet away from a rat, but in Japan I feel like you're never more than 6 feet away from a robot. But nice. I loved it. I loved it. I mean, I wish I could make a whole project just on urban spaces in Japan, and even between cities I find they're different. Of course, Tokyo.
That's very true.
Got another one. AK says she or he would love to hear some more recordings, so maybe it's a good time to listen to some of Matt's clips.
Sorry, we've kind of gone off on a tangent. You are here to some sounds after all. I'd like to play you some of the recordings that I made. I'd like them, if Kyoko, you can play them just consecutively, and after we can open it up to, what I'm really interested in is your reflections. Maybe some of you, it brings back a memory or a place, but I'm not going to tell you anything about them, and then I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Thanks, Kyoko, for playing those. So there's a bit of a thread from what you tried to present with these recordings, in that they, for me, the onus of the idea behind my project was to focus on the connection between three things: sound, nature, and spirituality. So I find in Japan that you have this incredible serenity to approach to sound. I think there's a really delicate use of sound, from the way that instruments are crafted to the way that ceremonies are run and temples are designed. There's often amazing kind of sonic thought that goes into the construction of temple buildings and bells and so on. So the thread with these was, they all use a kind of bell, or in Japanese, a suzu. And the first recording we heard was a suzu bell, which is a kind of a bell that is often found at Shinto shrines. And it's a bell that visitors will ring to communicate with to the kami, to the spirit world, the spirits of that place. It's kind of a way of signaling the presence to these beings. And that was a shrine that's a place called Doharo no Taki, which is in between Akita and Yamagata in the northern part of Japan, on a Mount Chokai. And it's an incredible place. It's a waterfall, a natural spring waterfall. And this shrine, there's kind of a temple, a torii gate with the bell attached to it. And you have people going to ring it and to be in the presence of this forest and this waterfall. And the sound is very delicate. And what I love is the transition from the physical world, from that bell, as it kind of fades away into the sound of this flowing water. And as we listen closely to water, we realize that it's very similar to white noise. It's just loads and loads of frequencies. And I'm drawn to a quote by the German scientist Alexander von Humboldt, who said that nature everywhere speaks to man in a voice. And that's something that I have always reflected on when I make recordings of nature. I feel that it's something, perhaps it's a language we don't understand, but the sounds are so rich. There's thousands of microsounds, even listening to running water. I'm particularly drawn to that place because for me, it kind of represents what that ringing that bell is. It's connecting us with that world, the world that we're not a part of, that other dimension. In Japan, known as the kami in the Shinto culture. And moving into the second recording, hopefully I'll have enough time just to briefly tell you about them. Stop me if I go on a bit too much. The second recording we heard is a Yamabushi, a recording with the Yamabushi, and the Yamabushi are a kind of ascetic mountain monks who live in various parts of Japan. This particular recording was made in Yamagata, which is a very kind of remote area in northwestern Japan. If you have Tokyo, and it's the opposite side of the island. And we heard these monks going through the forest, so we hear them signaling with their large horogai, which is like a conch shell, and we hear them saying the word ukatumo, which is an expression used by the Yamabushi to kind of say, I humbly accept to follow this path. And we hear the bells that they wear on their costumes, which are called mochisuzu, another kind of bell. And again, linking to the temple bells, it's a way for them to communicate with the forest, with the spirits in the forest, to let them know that they're there, to be a part of that world, to be a part of that place which they consider very holy. This was another mountain, Mount Haguro, which is a part of the sacred range of 3 mountains called the Dewa Sanzan. And I love this recording. It brings me to a world that is completely outside of anything that I can imagine or have heard experienced before. I was extremely lucky to have been able to follow the Yamabushi and to be invited into their home, into their environment. They're very few in number. It's an ancient culture that is based on the belief of Shugendo, which is a religion, an ancient religion, which was, I suppose, somewhere between having elements of both Buddhist and Shinto belief, which was quite heavily repressed during the Meiji Restoration. So there's a lot of history around that, which I won't go into today, but it's a very interesting culture, Shugendo culture, and the Yamabushi monks. So that second recording was that, and the final recording is of a temple bell, or a bonsho bell, which is often found at Japanese temples, Buddhist temples, and they're these incredibly huge, beautifully decorated bells, often many of them 500 years old or more, and they create this incredible resonance, as you heard in the recording. They're very deep. They're used as again, a communication. So they often are played. This particular one is actually, to those of you with a finer ear might have picked up, there's a change in the background ambience. So what I've done is taken two separate recordings. One was made at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the other one was made at 6 o'clock at night. So we start by hearing the crows and the night crickets, 6 o'clock in the morning. And we move into the one at night where we hear the cicadas. And the thing that I found beautiful about this recording is that it's the same bell. You have the same bell and the nature changing around it, but it's every day. The head monk of this temple does the same thing. He wakes up, he meditates, he performs his morning prayer, and then he rings the bell. And that's a way for everybody in that place. This particular place was a small town called Odaka in Fukushima, so not very far from the Daiichi plant. I was very fortunate to spend time with the head monk of this temple, and the significance of this recording was that it was a temple that was evacuated during the disaster, so it had been vacant for a long time, and it's only very recently that people have started to move back into the village, and people have started going back to the temple, which unfortunately was hit quite badly by the radiation because of the way that the radiation spread from the plant and where the wind took the radiation into the forest. So that was a recording of a bonsho bell. So I think maybe now might be a good time to open the discussion, or if you have any thoughts that you'd like to ask to me and definitely to Nick. I feel like we've already passed quite a lot of time and it seems to go so quickly. But
we have a few comments coming in. So Gail says, I'm missing Japan and would like to be taken back. So yeah, sound definitely takes you back to the place. And Sue says, Sue Hudson says, they're lovely to listen to with your eyes shut.
Well, that's a lovely comment. Thank you, Sue.
Oh, by the way, anyone who would like to, have your camera on and make comments or questions, please do. And we have, and Gail again says, temple sounds with crows is very much Japanese soundscapes for me. Marcello Carnero, if I'm pronouncing correctly. There is a great album from Paolo Dantas made only with recorded sounds from Japan. I don't know if Nick can know about.
No, I'd like to know more about that.
Paolo,
Paolo,
he put the link as well. It's called
cool.
Cidade Archipelago.
Okay.
I can send you this chat later on. So
Cool.
So Michael also has a question. Michael, would you like to ask yourself or no? Okay, he says, what's your response to the current situation whereby experience of natural sounds, particularly by children, is increasingly experienced from the internet, which is distanced from any context and more disturbingly can be confused with stylized reproductions? By way of example, I found it astonishing on a project I run in Tohoku that not 1 out of 60 participating children had any idea of what a lion actually sounded like.
Good point.
And Des Lewis says, I'm surprised your recordings do not pick up your breathing. Is there a range to record so not to pick up your own breath?
I think that's a great question. Well, all of those are great points and some lovely comments. I'm drawn to Des Lewis's question personally because it's something that I have had to put a lot of effort into doing. Unfortunately, I think when you start out field recording, you are so aware of all the sounds that it picks up. Microphones are so sensitive that your breathing and wind noise and everything can be picked up. So I'll be honest, when I'm recording, it takes a lot of focus for me to hold my breath. I breathe through my nose, and it's something that I've only just through practice I've worked out a way to not breathe towards the microphone. I don't know about you, Nick. Do you have a technique that works for you?
Yeah, I step away from the microphone so that it's not close to my nose. Yeah, I tend to do that. I tend to leave things set up and then move away from it. Or that's the only way I can think of doing that, really. But then the mics I have, like the Zoom I showed you earlier, I mean, I'll put it on a tripod and just, it's never that close to me anyway. And I monitor, check the sound, and then I kind of just leave it.
Would you like to respond to Michael's questions about? I guess from what I know from both of you, I mean, I haven't listened to all of your work, but I'm guessing there's not so much recording of kind of human talking sound, or do you ever, have you been in an environment where you wanted to record, certain people or a certain group of people or certain environment where there's, people are involved or any human activities or something?
Yeah, I mean, just recently I've been spending a lot of time, well, generally in Hokkaido as part of a project with the University of Tokyo, and that involves people talking about activities that they're engaged in. For example, back in the spring when I was there, there's a big thing which is about getting the syrup from the sap from maple trees to create, syrups and cosmetics, that kind of thing. And so part of the process, as well as the kind of sound of the people drilling into the tree and putting the tap in and the liquid coming through, was the voices around them as well. So the kind of, there's a family that do this that we met, and it's really important to capture that atmosphere as they were kind of not sort of documenting the process, but more like just trying to capture the atmosphere. And for me, again, it's about just trying to go with it, just to kind of put the microphone there, to not worry too much about. And in fact, it's better really if people don't think there's a microphone there, because then they're just more at ease. So it's just about, just enjoying the moment and the microphone, making sure it's not like particularly in view, or it's, putting it in front of people's faces and stuff. So for me, that's the way I would do that. And I've just made a a documentary that's going out next week on the World Service, I think it is, or Radio 4, I can't remember which one it is, called On Your Farm. It's a farming program. And I spent time in Hokkaido with this farmer, and that was recording him talking about his farm, and also recording the sounds of cows, and you know, having both really. Am I answering this question in any way, or am I just kind of talking about stuff?
There's actually similar questions that in relation to what's been asked. Are there ever situations where your presence is necessary or works with the recording itself? Or do you feel the aim to remove yourself completely?
That's a great question. Yes, a brilliant question. I mean, I can talk about when I was in Japan staying with the monks, the Yamabushi. I was invited to record, but I wasn't invited to participate because I wasn't a part of the circle, I wasn't a Yamabushi. So the agreement was that I had to be as invisible as possible. And I attended everything from their morning meditations to their walks in the forest. And yeah, it was extremely strange because, I mean, I stood out like a sore thumb in Japan because I'm 6'3". I have a beard and quite long hair, and I'm quite a big guy. And, you know, I can't enter into a room without banging my head or making noise on the tatami floor. So I found I was having to like very delicately move around. If anything, it was a very good practice for balance and how to sit for long times. I mean, and that's something with field recording that I think is unexpected, how much of how patient you have to be to get results. I don't know if you've ever tried this, you know, just sitting in a place for 5 minutes and listening to the sound. I mean, this is something you can do without a recorder. It takes effort, you know, your mind races, you have thoughts, you're drawn to things, your attention drives all over the place. So I suppose it's a little bit of a kind of like a meditation to bring you into that space. But yeah, I mean, it's a good question, buddy. Is your presence is necessary? I mean, I suppose if you're only, I would think if you're interviewing, if someone's interacting with you, then yeah, of course. But generally, you try to be invisible if you're making a soundscape.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think for me, it's about trying to be as invisible, you know, as possible, or certainly to not look like you're recording, isn't it? It's just because you just want activity to happen naturally around you. In the moment you put a microphone somewhere, people just kind of walk past and they're really quiet, or, you know, just kind of ruins the vibe, doesn't it? It's the ultimate in kind of like a piece of machinery that just kind of takes away the kind of soul of the moment, I think. So yeah, it's important, I think, for me anyway, just to merge into the landscape, I suppose, as much as possible.
There's a question for Nick. Are you noticing changes in sound during the Olympics?
Yeah, well, I was 2 weeks ago, I was making another program about the difference between 1964 and 2020 in Tokyo. And I went to the Olympic Stadium, and so obviously the games weren't on then, but the museum, which is right next door, it was empty. The whole area was empty. And generally the sound was, well, there's nothing going on. There's just a little faint construction sounds and things like that. And now that area is, as the Olympics has become quite popular, you know, people are watching it and really engaged. All the kind of official Olympic shops, for example, and that museum and the stadium area is busy now. People are kind of hanging out there and taking photos because they know it's only going to be on for the Olympics is on for another week, then the Paralympics. So on that very local kind of Olympic connected kind of soundscape, yeah, it is changing, you know, and I don't know what will happen in a few weeks' time when I think it's still a state of emergency, but the Olympics will have finished. So yeah, it is changing.
I'm not sure if you can answer this question. So this is a question from Des. Have you ever recorded and felt an earthquake? Have you ever recorded, in Japan?
I haven't. I was there well, yeah, it was something that crossed my mind because I was in Japan for a long time, and the earthquakes tend to happen quite frequently, I suppose. But I don't know. You'd have to somehow preempt it to get your microphones in a place. I don't know. They must exist though. I mean, there's videos, and videos have sound, but to get an actually, to get a kind of good stereo recording, you'd have to have some kind of clairvoyancy to see it coming. I don't know, but I think it would be magical if it happened. I mean, magical in a sense that it's such an incredible event of nature. Obviously, it would be quite traumatic as well. But I've met people who've experienced earthquake in Japan. The last big one, well, in 2011, before the Tohoku quake, and they talk about the sound of, depending on where you are, but people say that there's this incredible noise that comes from deep in the earth. Some people can hear it if it happens at night when it's quieter. But it would be interesting there must be some recordings online somewhere.
Yeah, I've got this a geophone which is designed to kind of measure the sound, or to record the sound of seismic activity. And on the few occasions there has been there've been 2, I think, in 18 months I've been here, earthquakes where they've been pretty full on, but obviously nothing majorly destructive in any way. But for me, quite big experiences. And the last thing I thought about was recording it, I must admit, even though it would be brilliant, and also they're over so quickly. By the time you've powered up your machine, and plugged you put your geophone into the ground, it's all over.
Okay. Sorry, Matt, were you going to say something? We have a question from Asako. Do you know any Japanese artists who does the same thing basically in Europe? Tetsu Inoue used to do this, but any others?
Who do field recording?
Like
as a practice.
European soundscapes.
Oh, European soundscapes of Japanese artists making
Japanese
European.
Artists, yeah.
I see. Yeah, I do know a few actually. There's there's Tomoko Hojo, who is now actually based back in Japan, but she was in London and then Germany for quite a while. So she's kind of like quite nomadic in a way. So she's somebody who is working with really interesting, really beautiful, interesting projects with someone called Rahel Kraft in Switzerland. So they're a duo and they do some really interesting work. So that's somebody I would definitely recommend checking out her work. She's a lot of gallery work as well. Really interesting artist. So I've been working with her recently, but at the moment she's in Nagoya, but she's also involved in projects in Russia. And there's an artist whose artist name is A Bird Whale, who's based in London, who's a Japanese artist, who's also creates some really interesting kind of location recordings. And his work is field recording based as well. So he's somebody I would recommend. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because even in Japan, I don't think it's a big thing. It feels like the UK and maybe America and other places, there is a kind of much more of a field recording scene, if you want to call it that. Whereas in Japan, it feels very disparate, and it also doesn't feel like there's any particular cohesiveness to the practice as a concept. I don't know, that's my experience.
Okay. Is it possible to say which is more interesting for you, natural sound or man-made sound?
Wow. I think it's a good question. I think, I think it's incredibly difficult to truly find natural sound. It's something that you really, I find going, I often go to the forest to do a lot of recording because that's an environment that I find fascinating. One of my other projects. I recently worked on a program for BBC World Service, which looked at it was the crowd science program, which looked at the ancient question of, if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one around to hear it, does it make a sound? And it was quite fascinating. I was asked to create a soundscape of a tree falling, but without using the sound of a tree falling, if you follow. So I had to create the sound of a tree falling using other sounds. So essentially creating a natural sound using man-made sound. And I think the effect worked really well, because this goes back perhaps to answer Michael Spencer's question as well. You know, we can imagine the sound of a tree falling, but possibly most of us have never seen a tree fall. So we kind of have this mental sound of what it could be like, but you know, to see a tree fall is quite an event. You have to be either in the logging industry or you know, you're someone who's witnessed it. But I think now it's more, you know, even when we talk about natural sound, like to look at Chris Watson's work again, he's an incredible sound recordist. I think possibly I'd go and say that he's maybe the greatest natural sound recordist that's ever lived. His ability to get sounds from all environments using all kinds of techniques is incredibly knowledgeable, and a lot of his work features on the documentaries like Planet Earth and Green and Blue Planet. But without casting a shadow on his work, I think it's fair to say that a lot of the sound that you hear in the production is added in post-production. So when you, for example, when you're listening to the sound of a beach or an ocean soundscape, and you might see a whale or dolphins coming by, I think Chris and his team would have made a recording, but that's often been mixed, it's been added, there's other elements of sound design that have gone into that. So I think there's this, certainly now where we are in 2021, almost all sound is a blend of natural and man-made. You know, even using a field recorder, a sound recorder, is you're using something that's man-made, and it's using a digital recorder, so it's using it's not a natural process. It's being turned from acoustic energy into digital, into sound. So it's an really interesting question. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Nick. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I had a chat with Ruchi Sakamoto a couple of years ago about the idea that I think I'd just been to Aomori, and I'd just been recording insects in this part of northern Japan, and he was saying, you know, what were you up to? And I just said, I'd just been recording sounds, and I'm just amazed at how electric, you know, the sounds are. And then I kind of said to him, you know, as a composer, as a kind of creator of music, you know, who's also obviously getting more and more interested in this kind of natural sound and field recordings and things. I said, you know, do you feel that maybe sometimes the natural soundscape is the greatest form of composition in terms of as a listening experience? You know, do you feel that maybe as an artist you're trying to get to be as good as that, you know? And he actually said, yeah. He said, yeah, I think, you know, the more I listen to the natural world, the more I realize that I can't match that. I can never be as good with all my synthesizers and all my knowledge of music. He said, but it doesn't stop me trying. You know, I'm going to keep on trying to be as good. I thought that was such a lovely response, you know, that you kind of get to that stage in your career where you've done so much, you know, with unnatural sound, if you like. And you go, yeah, okay, you know, nature does it better, but I'm going to keep trying to make it something as good.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's kind of that idea of being invisible, isn't it? You spend so much time putting your creativity into presenting it, and then eventually you just want to be invisible. And
yeah,
incredible.
There's a question from Asako. Can you comment on the soundscapes of Japanese gardens, which is, I guess, mix of man-made environment and the nature?
Have you made recordings of Japanese gardens, Nick?
Not so many. I remember one that I made years ago in near to Nara, and I remember being really drawn to. I can't remember the name of it, but it's it's like a kind of wooden, like a half pipe that fills with water, then it kind of drops, and it keeps making a kind of every now and again. It just
The water droppers.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what it's called? A water dropper. Great.
I think that's. I'm sure there's a more elegant name in Japanese for sure.
That's what I'm going to call it. So that's the only recording I've ever really made that had a kind of, that I can remember, that was kind of like a man-made garden with a kind of, man-made object within it. It was beautiful. I have no idea what that recording is, but yeah, that's the only thing I can think of.
There's an instrument. Well, I don't know if you class it as an instrument. It's something that I didn't record when I was in Japan, but I've actually, since coming back, I've built one. It's called a suikunkutsu, I think is the word. Maybe my pronunciation is not great. But it's a device like a pot, a large pot, which is inverted and put under the ground and then covered in rocks. And the water flows and drops into the vase, to the pot, and creates this incredible kind of resonance sound of rain falling. But you find them in gardens, I think, in temple gardens, but also in urban places. There's some around in Tokyo, I think. That's a sound that I have wanted to record, but I've noticed in the comments Rake and Gravel from Rake and Gravel is a good one. Yeah, when the monks are reorganizing the garden, that's a lovely sound. In fact, I quite a few of my recordings, I just put the microphones following the movements of the monks. I found that in itself, the way that their feet kind of move across tatami, across the wooden boards of temples, it's such an fascinating sound. I could listen to them for hours. But yeah, it depends on, I think it's it's a sound that's quite unique to Japan as well, because things like, even in my head I think of tatami, and tatami has such a sound, such a texture, such a thing that we don't find it really anywhere else.
Sue Hudson says clipping trees and bushes, giggling school students.
Giggling school students, yeah.
Okay, sadly we ran out of time, and before we finish, maybe you can talk about your future project quickly, and before we finish. Like, what's your plan?
Me personally? So my project started in 2019, and back then I'd kind of planned to return every year and revisit some of the places, but also expand the areas. In the time that I was there, I was really lucky. I traveled to many places, all the way from Hokkaido down to Fukuoka. I visited Fukushima, I visited Yamagata, Aomori. But Japan is just incredibly diverse. There's so many places that you could go and dedicate an entire project. So my plan is to try and get out next year. I think it's going to be dependent on, obviously, the current situation. For me, the most important thing is that it's safe to travel. I think a lot of the people that I spent time recording were older people, people that might be at risk to the coronavirus. So as soon as it's safe to do so, I think I'll start planning a trip and getting back in touch with some of the places that I recorded and moving from there. And obviously, it'd be a pleasure to come and visit you, Nick, because
that'd be great.
We could maybe plan some trips together. Hey?
Yeah, totally. We should do that.
But you've got some interesting projects going on with is it Music City Space? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, there's the website is mscty.space, which is a kind of, I mean, it's not just Japan. We've got actually very little work in Japan up there at the moment, but it's a kind of exploration of the sound of place. So it's an ongoing project, and Japan is going to be very much a bigger part of that from the rest of this year. And then a track of yours, Matt, is going to be on another compilation that I'm putting out pretty soon, called Field Wave. I've got, this is volume 1, it's cassette and digital. Yeah, there it is, beautiful cassette. And so volume 2 is going to be focused on Japan, and that's going to come out very soon. You've got an amazing track on it, Matt, which is just amazing, yeah, beautiful.
A pleasure to contribute. So if you're interested in hearing that, check out the Field Wave Bandcamp. It's got its own dedication.
It'll be on Bandcamp. Yeah, it's going to be through a label called Non-Classical.
That's it.
Who I released the compilation series through. And then for me, just the only other projects really are just, I've got a few things at the BBC at the moment. So there's the Sounds of Japan series on Radio 3, which you can listen to on BBC Sounds. And then I've recently did a kind of ambient music mix, which has kind of got field recordings as part of the mix as well, which is on 6 Music, which is on BBC Sounds as well. So yeah, I've been quite weirdly in demand in Japan through the BBC, because, you know, obviously not many people can get out here still. So yeah, so kind of just using the opportunity to kind of get as much music and sound from this place via the BBC as possible at the moment.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Matt, and everyone who came to joined on a Sunday morning. Thank you very much. And yeah, have a lovely Sunday, and thank you again for joining.